If you know Lectric, you know that they're known for being the value kings in e-bikes, dropping the original Lectric XP for just $9.99 all those years ago. Well, now it's 2025. Tariffs are hitting hard, e-bike prices are climbing what seems like by the day, and you could say the bike industry is feeling the squeeze. So, what if I told you Lectric dropped an all-new version of the Lectric XP in its XP4 model, but this time with a completely redesigned frame, sharper geometry, upgraded components nearly front to back, and somehow kept that price at the original $999 that started it all? Well, here they have, the Lectric XP4. So, let's do a deep dive and jump into all things on this new Lectric XP4. So, like I said, guys, Lectric is back with the all-new XP4. Here it is. I know a lot of people have been wondering about when this bike is going to come out. There's been a lot of just asking online, and so I'm really pleased to get it in, got some testing done with it, and sharing it with you guys today. So let's just run through all the numbers. Starting with the top, this is a Class 2, but Class 3 capable e-bike, so it'll ship to you in Class 2 settings, limited to 20 miles an hour, but through their new display up top, which we will talk about in a few minutes, you just hit a couple buttons and you're Class 3 unlocked with no trouble at all. Now, on top of that, this is priced at just the same $999 that started it all for Lectric years ago. And like I said in the intro, that's kind of a wild price considering all the things affecting the economy right now, but we're definitely happy to see it, and I think a lot of you guys at home are too. Now, of course, if you want to kit this out with some upgraded long-range battery components, or maybe get the beefed up 750 watt version, because this is the 500, that will add on a couple $100. But if you want the 500 watt version with 50 miles of range like we have right here, this is just $999. Now, in terms of safety certifications, included in that price somehow, they also have these bikes and batteries UL 2849 certified and UL 2271 certified. Now, when it comes to weight, they say this bike on their marketing material they sent me with this pre-production release, it said it weighed 61 pounds without the battery. And I wasn't sure if that meant just for the 500 or for the 500 and the 750. So I just went ahead and threw this up on the scale without the battery, and it was about 63 pounds, so just 2 pounds over their estimation. And when you put the battery in, it's about 70 pounds, like 70.7, and the battery itself weighs right around 7.5 pounds. Now, in terms of frame options or motor options when you buy this, this is the ST, so it's got a lower stand-over height, so step-through frame. But if you want a high-step version or a step-over version like they call it, they have that as well. It's got a slightly higher top tube. Also, this is the 500 watt version, but if you want a more beefier version or you live in an area with a lot of hills, you can opt for the 750 watt version or a long range version. So there's a couple options at checking out, but the standard 500 watt with 50 miles of range is $999. Now, in terms of colors, this is the Stratus White, although it's a little dusty from our red Southern Utah dirt, but they also have a Tempest Gray in this 500 watt version. And if you opt to go up to the 750 watt version, they still have this Stratus White and Tempest Gray, but they also add in Pine Green and Raindrop Blue. Now, some geo numbers for this new frame. Actually, we should talk about this new frame. So aside from just a new look, they kept the heart of the Lectric XP soul just in the look of the frame, but they did clean it up, soften some lines and corners, as you can see, give it a more modern look. It looks really nice. But on top of that, they tweaked the geometry to just ride a little bit better and feel a little bit more comfortable. Specifically up front, we have a 0-degree stem. So previously on the last version of the XP, the stem did not align with the head tube angle, so they had a slight off axis by design, which put the reach out just a little bit further than people liked. And so this time they went with a 0-degree stem, meaning that stem is in the exact same line as that head tube angle of the bike, giving you a closer reach and ultimately a more comfortable ride. So it was nice to see that addressed in addition to the just aesthetic and looks of the frame as well. Now, on top of that, they also increased the rigidity or the firmness of this frame, so it rides a little bit more responsive and handles just a little bit better. So really, looks, reach, geo, and handling all improved with this new frame design. So they did a really good job there. Now, some geo numbers for this specific frame, the ST frame. The standover height is a pretty low 17 inches. The reach up top has been shortened to a nice, short, and comfortable 16 inches. The wheelbase is just shy of 45 inches, like 44.9. And you have 12 inches of adjustability in this massive seat tube here. Now, the beauty of that is you've got a long telescoping stem up top and a long telescoping seat here. So you really can fit a wide range, and that's what they've done with their 2 frame sizes. It fits a rider height range of from 4'10" all the way up to 6'3", and that's for both styles of frames. So anyone between 4'10" and 6'3" can find a home on the new Lectric XP4. Now the max payload for this bike is 330 pounds. Now they also went with the same 20" by 3" wheel and tire setup. So we've got an aluminum wheel at 20 inches and it's wrapped in a Lectric branded, kind of an all-season tire that's 3 inches wide. Now they say you can fill this between 25 and 45 PSI. I run just over 25. I always keep things on the lower end personally because it just adds more comfort, more grip. It's a nicer ride. Now if I want to max out range and make it completely optimal, I can always bump up to 45 PSI. But if I want comfort and cruising, I always stay lower on the PSI, which is what I recommend you do. Now, in terms of fenders, racks, accessories, they really kit this thing out with a lot. So let's just start back here with the rack. This is the new level up rack, which when it is being used can carry up to 150 pounds of payload back here, not to exceed the bike's max 330 with the rider included, but nonetheless 150 pounds, and it's compatible with their buddy seat and yep seat. So if you want to have a child passenger on here, as long as you're keeping it within that weight range, you've got that ability here as well, which is really cool. Now, in terms of fenders, they did include fenders both front and back. They are a polypropylene fender. They have a nice secure mounting. They're not very flimsy. They feel good, and they've made no noise on my rides. So all in all, the fenders act just like they should. And in terms of lighting, we got front headlight, LED 90 lumens, rear tail light mounted right here under the frame. And they added this time around turn signals left and right that can be seen from the rear end. So if you're using this to commute, ride around towns, do a little just riding in traffic, things like that, now you've got that extra visibility, not only a brake light indicator, but your turn signals as well, letting people behind you know when you're going to turn. So just added more features to it all in all. Now, as far as mounting points go, as you can see, we obviously have mounting points for fenders and rear racks, as well as mounting points for the front rack there if you want to add that as well. But in addition, they've also added 2 bosses right back here, which is a really cool spot for an accessory, a bottle cage, or some other tool you want to put back there. Then you've got 3 on the down tube here, and you've got 2 on the underside of the down tube, which we actually had the electric folding lock installed there, but I went ahead and removed it because I was just looking at the bike overall and checking some things, and so I went ahead and took that off. But there's lots of mounting points to kind of rig this out however you would like, and I like when they add those optional mounting points. It just makes life a little bit more practical to have some things to work with. All right, now in terms of the power, this is the 500 watt version. So as you can expect, there is a 500 watt rear hub motor here. Now this power combo of 55 Newton meters of torque and 1,092 peaking watts has given this bike and me the ability to ride around town and tackle just about anything I want. But I will say on steeper hills, the 500 watt motor is gonna want you to give a little bit of assistance in the pedals. Now it can do it on throttle, but it'll just be slower than you probably want on throttle, depending on how steep the hill is. Your average everyday hills, under 10% grades, it's gonna do just fine on throttle and pedaling. But if you start exceeding like 10, 12%, getting into the really steep stuff, at that point you're gonna wanna pedal and give it some assistance, but it can actually handle it all on its own. Just depends on how aggressively or how fast you wanna get up that hill. Now, if you want a little bit more power, they have this 750 watt version that pumps out 85 Newton meters of torque and will likely handle any hill you have in front of you. But for the 500 watt version, it does hold its own in almost every scenario I gave it. But like I said, anything over about 10, 12%, just know you're probably going to want to add in some leg muscle to the mix. Now, in terms of the riding modes, so Lectric has changed everything about how the display works and the riding modes. So this now has, it previously would say PAS 1 through 5, and now it has Eco Sport, or Eco, Tour, Sport, Sport Plus, and Turbo. And those levels are easily to read on the display here, and all 5 get progressively more aggressive as you use them. Now, the motor is activated here by a torque sensor, and this torque sensor, I would say, is not probably like the torque sensor you're expecting. So it does do a good job of giving a more natural pedal feel, but it's not a pedal-focused bike. Lectric made it a point to keep these bikes feeling like e-bikes. Some bikes have a focus on the torque sensor being the most natural, cycling purist feel of pedaling you can get. And then Lectric on this one gave you a torque sensor. It is smooth and it is natural feeling, but it's also a little punchy, a little peppy, and it's kind of just geared to make you feel like, yeah, I'm riding an e-bike where life is a little bit easier. And I think a lot of people will appreciate that. Now, when it comes to how this motor is powered, this is powered through a 499 watt-hour battery that is in this down tube that can be removed when the bike is in its folded open position. Now this has a UL certification of 2271. It's also got a 48 volt rating, 10.4 amp hours, giving us that almost 500 watt hours of power. Now in terms of warranty, this bike and the battery has a 1-year warranty. And one cool thing they changed this time around is on the previous versions of Lectric XPs, you had to leave the key in the key slot of the frame, even when you're riding the bike. So for it to work, you had to have that key in, almost like a car. They have removed that requirement. I think a lot of us are really happy to see that. So now you don't need to have the key in the bike to ride it. You can just have it in your pocket if you want to pull the battery for storage or security, which is a really, really nice updated improvement for this bike. Now in terms of range, they say you can get up to 50 miles on this 500 watt version with the standard 10.4 amp hour battery. Of course, I gave it a test when I got this bike. I just did one test because I haven't had the bike for that long. And on the one test, I got 44 miles using the lower level of assist. Now I will say I'm gonna redo that test because I did it out and back. So I basically went out 22 miles, turned around, came back 22 miles. And that coming back 22 miles was all a really pretty prominent headwind. Now, while that's not gonna have a huge impact on range, it might give me a couple more miles to get me closer to that 50, but all in all, basically 44, 45 miles on a single run is a really solid entry for a $999 fully loaded bike like this. And if you want a little bit more range, they always have the extended range version or the 750 version, and those have longer range options as well. Now, when it comes to components on the new XP4, that's another area that got a big bump in spec, almost front to back. So we'll just go through each one, talk about what's changed and what we came from to what we're to now. So I'll start with the drivetrain. This is now a Shimano Altus 8-speed setup. We previously had a lower tier Shimano Tourney with a 7-speed setup, and that one had an 11 to 28 tooth rear cassette. So now we've got 8-speed Shimano Altus. We've moved up a level in the group set hierarchy, and we got a wider cassette range at 11 to 32. Having a wider cassette range may not seem like much on paper, but what it translates to when you own the bike is having more gear range to work with, meaning you've got more options on a steeper hill, you've got more options when you want to go faster. It's just a wider range leads to more possibilities when you're pedaling, so it's always a net good for you as the owner. Now up front, we've got a 56 tooth chainring and a double-sided chain guard, which is a really nice feature, and 170 millimeter cranks. Now, if you look at the pedals, that's another area that changed. Previously, we had plastic folding pedals that come on a lot of folding bikes, but Lectric has also been creating bikes that have quick release pedals, like the X-Peak is one of the more recent models that had them. And these quick release pedals have always been popular with people, and they added them to the Lectric XP4, but this time they've had a full redesign. Who'd have thought on the pedals, I know, but it's actually quite good choice because these now are a 6000 series aluminum. They have a little bit better look in general, but more importantly, the last iteration of the quick release pedals worked well, and I personally liked them, but every now and then you'd apply them, you'd lock them in, think you're good to go, and then randomly it would just pop out. You had to kind of finesse it sometimes just to get it just right. This new set of quick release uses a spline system on the piston inside, and it just really easily connects, and when it connects, it is in there. There's no false positives, no worry about the pedal falling out. So just a nice simple addition to the bike that kind of goes a long way in convenience. Now, when it comes to braking, Lectric partnered with Star Union. They're a well-known brake manufacturer of hydraulic disc brakes, and they did a collab between Lectric and Star Union, and they came out with what they call the 602 series hydraulic disc brakes. And we ended up with kind of a home run in brakes. So we got 180 millimeter rotors front and back, which is nothing new, and 2-piston calipers. But what they did change is they went with a thicker rotor, a 2.3 millimeter thick rotor. And what that did is it gives us better braking, better cooling, longer life for the brake pads, and ultimately really just better braking in general. The levers up top are alloy levers, and they have really nice modulation. Frankly, these brakes punch above their weight class and would probably be seen and more commonly seen on a higher tier bike. Now, this has one small quirk to know about. With thicker rotors, you have less space between the brake pads to perfectly center it. So unless you get in there and perfectly tweak it, you could end up with a little bit of rotor rub in the beginning. But if you don't want to deal with that, you don't want to tweak on your brakes, don't worry, because as you use those brake pads, they will wear down a little bit. It'll create more space and therefore that rotor. Now, up here in the saddle, this is Lectric's branded saddle. It's a pretty typical kind of weatherproof saddle here that has spring supports on the bottom and some nice padding up top. And like I said, you have a massive 12 inches of seat post adjustability through the quick release lever here. Now, if you want a suspension seat post, Lectric does offer that when you order the bike. You could just add that as an upgrade and get a suspension seat post as well. Now moving up front here to the fork, we got a front suspension fork. This one has 50 millimeters of travel. It is a coil spring with a lockout feature up top, so you can lock out that suspension mechanism, or you can unlock it and get it back. And then on the left, you have a preload to kind of adjust how the fork responds to you based on your riding style and body weight. Now up top here in the cockpit, we've got an alloy bar. It's about 26.5 inches wide, or about 680 millimeters. On both ends, we have lock-on platform grips, which are really nice for just comfort. You can rest your palms on them while you're riding. And because they're lock-ons, they don't spin, they don't slip off. They kind of just stay right where they should, which is really nice. Both ends also have the Star Union 602 series brake levers. These are alloy levers. And like I said, the modulation is really nice on these. On the right side here, we have a bell and our under the bar trigger shifters. Previously, we had the over the bar kind of clunky old school index shifters. They weren't very intuitive. They worked, but they were just kind of annoying. This is a much cleaner setup, easier to use, easier for your muscle memory of your hands while you're riding. And it has this little window here to show you what gear you're in, gear 1 through 8. On the left side, we have our push throttle here and our control pad with the turn signal buttons for the new display. And so let's take a closer look at this new display because it's another area that got a full makeover. All right, so this is the new home screen on the all new 3.5-inch display. So a couple things to note. This is, well, first off, a nice clean user interface. Before we had a lot of metrics on the home screen. You still have a lot of metrics, but they make the basic screen super simple and easy to read. Also below here, you've got a USB Type-C charging port, and this is all the data when you basically just turn on the bike. So you get a numerical percentage of the battery bar and you get a battery bar visual. Now I will say on the battery bar, this is a unique new thing for me where this battery bar goes down, whether it's in numerical or in the battery bar indicator, it's gonna go down in 10% increments. So it goes from 100 to 90, 90 to 80, and so on down to 0 as you use the battery. So if you're looking for individual percentages like 99, 98, 97, you're not gonna see that. It basically goes 100, 90, 80, 70, all the way down to 10 and 0. In the center, we have our speed in miles per hour, which of course you can change to kilometers. Down below, it indicates our PAS, or pedal assist, is off, but as you hit the plus and minus, you can see those will just change on the display. So like I said earlier, we now have Eco mode, Tour mode, Sport, Sport Plus, and Turbo. Now, if you want to see other screens, you can just simply tap the power button and that will take you to the data screens. And they've put some really cool metrics in here. So up top, you can keep your speed and your PAS so you know where you're riding, but now you can watch some real-time metrics like your trip time, your cadence, which will tell you how many rotations per minute you're pedaling, your trip distance, and your odometer on the bike. But if you want more data regarding the motor and battery, that's where you can go to this screen. And now you can get input power. So that's going to measure your pedaling input, your motor power, how it's responding in power output, your amps that it's using, and the real-time voltage, which will change while you're riding the bike. If you want to go back to the basic screen, you tap it one more and you're on the home screen. Now, if you remember previous versions of electric bikes, when you go into the advanced settings, it's almost like you need a second handbook. It feels like a second language in there with the symbols. Now they have fixed that and I could not be happier. You simply hold the plus and minus buttons and look how pretty that is. We just simple menus that make perfect sense. So we have our screen brightness, our sleep timer for how long the bike goes to sleep once you stop using it, our distance units like we talked about, miles per hour, kilometers per hour, tire size if you had to change that, bike classification. So no crazy symbols or codes to know. You want to change your class from class 2 to class 3, you go to bike classification. You've got class 1, class 2, class 3, and now a new unique class for California, California class 3. So hit that, you get back out. Assistance level, you can go in here and do a standard torque multiplier or an increased torque multiplier. So if you're looking for more torque out of the ride, you can use this setting here. Going down again, throttle and PAS toggle. You have choices here where PAS is active, throttle's inactive. When PAS is inactive, throttle is active, or both. When PAS is active, you can still have throttle active, which is where we set it. Throttle output, here you can change throttle output limited based on your PAS level, or you can get full throttle output at all PAS levels. I really like this kind of customization because everyone has a different preference. Hitting it again and going down, throttle 0 start, you can have throttle active from a standstill, so basically from 0 miles an hour, or you can change it to where it will only work once you start rolling. Now, the reason why this could be beneficial to some people is because starting a e-bike from zero on throttle only will be a massive power draw, and it will use the largest amount of power. So some people like to pedal start first just to do that extra work on the front end and then get the extended range on the back end by not ever throttling from a dead stop. Totally up to you, but at least the option is there. Hitting it again, we can go to walk mode, and there you can change your walk mode settings to either 3 miles an hour or 3.7 miles an hour. If you don't know what walk mode is, it's basically holding the minus button, and it will allow this motor to move at 3 or 3.7 miles an hour. So you could just walk with the bike if you're moving it somewhere instead of moving all the heft on your own. But I'll leave that at 3 miles an hour. Light operation, here you can go into the headlight. Lights are off until manually turned on, which you do by holding the plus button, or you can change it to lights flash when bike is on. When manually turned on, the flashing stops. So I'll leave this the way it is. All right, so then we've got our odometer reset. If you go into here, you can reset the odometer if you want to, but I'm not gonna do that right now. So let's get out of that. And then to get out of this, we'll just simply hold the plus and minus one more time, and that takes us back to the home screen, with the exception of the turn signal, which is a good reminder there. Turn signals are on the left and right directional pads. You just tap them on, tap them off, and that really makes up the new display. Super good job on the display. I love the USB Type-C charging, and even more importantly, the super easy to read and navigate menus. All right, guys, I'm just gonna fold the new Lectric XP4 to show you how that process works. It's pretty straightforward, but like all folding bikes, there's still roughly 70-pound objects that move, so they can get a little awkward, but the process is straightforward and easy. So I'm just gonna lower the seat post down here a little bit to get it out of the way. I'm also going to unlatch the stem locking mechanism so the handlebars come down by the side. And then I'm going to open this quick release latch that, as you can see, lets the bike fold into half. Now, once it's in this folded configuration, the dimensions are about 37 by 17 and 29 inches respectively. And that is the entire process. As you can see, 15 to 20 seconds and pretty straightforward. All right, guys, we're out on the all new XP4 by Lectric. So obviously we've had a lot to talk about with all the changes on this bike, but I'm gonna just talk about how some of those changes just translate to how this bike rides. Because while the changes might look a little subtle from the curb appeal, you know, the first time you glance at it, you're like, oh, that's an Lectric XP. But there's a lot of subtle changes everywhere. And the most immediate, besides just the appearance of the frame, the most immediate is this 0 degree stem. What that means is 0 degree is that the steerer tube all the way up through the stem, into the stem, and into the handlebar, there's no degree change from the head tube angle. So the the head tube angle of that front head tube is exactly in line with this handlebar stem coming up. So the reason why that's important is because on the previous models, they had angled the stem a little bit outwards. And what that ultimately did is, you can see my arms are fairly straight out right now. So imagine if this handlebar was another inch or two forward, I'd be locked out trying to hold it. So them going to a 0 degree stem really helped with the reach. It shortened it to about, I think, 16 or 17 inches. I think closer to 17 is probably it. But either way, it feels more comfortable to ride because you're not stretched out like you were on the previous generations. And then the other thing that's really obvious is the frame's rigid feel. So it got a little stiffer, got a little more responsive. It's just handles a little bit quicker because of that more rigid frame. So this is a 500 watt motor, 55 Newton meters of torque, and peaks at 1092 watts. Let's do a little throttle test, and we'll put it on turbo, and we'll go from a dead stop to the class 2 limit of 20 miles an hour. And then I'll change it to class 3 and we'll get up to 28 miles an hour. So 3, 2, 1. All right, so getting up to speed here. We're already at 14, 17, and 20. So it's pretty quick. I think for a 500 watt motor, the way they've got this programmed, you can tell there's an emphasis on this having a nice peppy feel, making it more e-bike focused than pedaling focused. Sometimes torque sensors are programmed so you feel like a cyclist, right? You get a perfectly natural pedal stroke and motor delivery that matches how hard you're working.
And then in this, I would say this one's more on the side of, they want it to feel like you have an e-bike. It's not quite cadence sensory where it's all or nothing. It's much more refined than a cadence sensor, but it's also a little similar to a cadence sensor in that it's gonna give you a lot more power, I think, than you're expecting. Not uncontrollable, it doesn't jump off the line or anything like that, but it's not a reserved, casual acceleration. I'd say it's a quick, almost peppy acceleration. A little bit more than I expected, to be honest. But let's see how the 55 Newton meters of torque does on the next two hills. Well, we're not even that close yet, but we can talk about the brakes first. So the brakes are the Star Union, but they're a collab with Lectric, and they branded them 602s. And all the basics are there. So they're a nice hydraulic disc brake. They got nice alloy levers, but some of the more surprising parts, on your left, thank you. Some of the more surprising parts are the modulation. And I don't know if that comes from these bigger reservoirs they have in the barrels on these levers. I'm not sure what it is, but the braking modulation is like, I mean, I would honestly say these brake feeling wise compete with a higher end brake. So whatever that collab was, I know they got their 602 branding, which 602 is the area code out of where Lectric is headquartered. Oh, got this little hill here. We're holding 20. We did go down to about 17.3, so we lost a little bit, about 2.5 miles an hour there. But we'll hold it in the next one in the neighborhood, which is longer, 5 to 7%, for about a quarter mile. So aside from the collab where they got the branding of 602, whatever they came up with, or maybe it's just this series of brakes they collabed on, I think they're pretty solid brakes, like surprisingly solid. And another cool factor for these brakes is they went with a 2.3 millimeter thick piston. So what that does is better cooling, better braking, better longevity, basically all around positive, just in general. But let's hold this throttle on turbo, go up our normal hill here. We're still accelerating up. Looks like we're holding about 19.6 on the speedometer, 19.8 I saw it hit. (19.6). So not quite topping out at 20, but oh, there we go, 20.1. I spoke too soon. Just took a little long to get up there. And I think that's on par. 500 watt motor, 55 Newton meters of torque. Those aren't huge, you know, fat tire bike numbers like the X-Peak or something like that. This bike isn't designed to go conquer mountains. It's supposed to just get you around a little bit, do a little bit of everything from camping ride to city commuter ride to weekend fun ride. And I think that's where 55 Newton meters of torque and 500 watts does shine. I'm gonna use my turn signals here, thanks to them integrating turn signals, which I didn't really expect, but I'm pretty pumped they did it because I do a lot of riding around town, I commute to work, and I just think turn signals on e-bikes should be a thing in general, but they're not always. Maybe not with EMTBs, but most other ones could all use them. Another thing they upgraded on this, let me get my other turn signal on. Another thing they upgraded on this was the gears and the drivetrain. So we previously on the XP3 had a Shimano Tourney drivetrain with a 7-speed rear cassette that had a range of 11 to 28. And that's the number of teeth on the high cog and the low cog. So that was the range of gears we could work with a 56 tooth chainring up front. Well, now we got a bigger 58 tooth chainring, which means it's going to provide more power with the same amount of pedaling as the 56, just because there's more teeth on it. And then on top of that, in the rear, we got the 8-speed Altus derailleur and an 8-speed cassette at 11 to 32. So we've widened up that range. It just gives us a larger percentage of gear ratios to work with. And ultimately what that translates to is when you're riding the bike, whether you're riding on a flat, a downhill, a small uphill, a larger uphill, having more range in your gears allows you to be more adaptable to whatever your elevation changes are, or how you're riding, or how fast you're pedaling. So while gear range might not seem like a big deal to most of you or any of you, I would say it goes a long way in the ride in ways you probably don't even notice on a daily basis. But if you went backwards to the old cassette after riding this for a while, I think you would definitely feel a difference at that point. Another thing I want to show you real quick before we wrap this up is the new display, which I know we do a deep dive on it, but I just want to show you how easy it is to change to Class 3 on the display here. So I don't know if you guys can see it, but I'm just simply going to hold the plus and minus. And look at that beautiful screen. No more crazy codes or hieroglyphics to try to decipher. Go right to bike classification, go from Class 2 to Class 3, and you can simply back out of this and you are back to your home screen, now in Class 3 speeds. So let's do a speed check to 28 miles an hour, and we'll see how that acceleration translates from the Class 2 to the Class 3 specifications. Let me get off this hill, that'd be a little bit of cheating. Get to some flat ground. Also, there's 12 inches of adjustability in the seat post, and you have a telescoping stem here. So really this fit range of 4'11 to 6'3 on one frame size, I'd say is valid because I have plenty more seat post I could use, and I have a lot more telescoping stem that I could use as well. So if you're on the taller side or the shorter side, I wouldn't be too concerned with this bike because it's really adaptable based on those longer stem and seat posts. But let's go to 20, and then we'll just shoot past 20 and get up to 28. All right, so there's 20, now let's go to 28. And there we go, 28 miles an hour. So I didn't have to pedal crazy hard or crazy fast. Didn't raise my breath or anything, you know, my heart rate. Just a little bit extra pedaling beyond 20 miles an hour, and it reaches 23, no problem. Also, if you notice, we're on turbo with the motor. We're going over 20 miles an hour. The motor's working hard, but it's not loud. It's very quiet, very smooth. Really, if you just wrap your head around the fact that the torque sensor on this is going to be a little peppier than maybe a more pedal-friendly bike, or pedal-focused bike is a better way to put it. This focuses on being an e-bike, and I think a lot of people appreciate that, because there's a lot of folks who buy these bikes and they're not trying to become, you know, cyclists and Lycra on the side of the road. They want to have fun, enjoy themselves, and get around without making a big deal out of it, and that's exactly what this bike provides. But let's go back and we will talk about this from a build perspective, mechanics perspective, and get a little deeper into all these parts we're talking about. All right, guys, so let's look at the XP4 500 watt from more of a ownership, mechanic standpoint, just things like serviceability, longevity of the bike, things you should look out for just to make it last as long as it could, and some things you should know about if you plan on maintaining it yourself or taking it in for service to a local bike shop. These little points we're going to go over are things you should just be aware of. So I'm going to start with some of the good, and then I'll go through some things I would like improved. So starting with the good, you guys know I'm a fan of plastic fenders. They can take a beating, they don't rust, they don't bend, they don't rattle. They're lightweight, and I can only assume or guess that they're probably cheaper than metal ones, but nonetheless, regardless of price, I just prefer a plastic fender. Now, on top of that, this new frame, we've got better looking lines, kind of a more modern look for the XP. It kind of has a more boxy history, and while they kept the intent and the look of the bike, they did soften up the corners, but more importantly, they stiffened up this frame. So it's got more material in the right spots, whether it's these cross members, the gussets, the design of the frame in general, whatever they've done to it, it just made it feel a bit more responsive and a bit better to ride. Now, also on that fact, one thing they changed with the frame, or one thing they do different than a lot of other brands, is you notice all the cables that go from the top here, they're not routed through the frame, and some people might not like that from a look standpoint, but two things to think about. One is they're out of sight, out of mind, running on the bottom side of here, but more importantly, they don't interfere with the hinge. A lot of folding bikes have all the cables going through here with the battery, and as you're opening and closing that frame, that hinge point, that lock,
many bikes and many people have had the unfortunate reality of getting wires and important cables pinched in that frame and ultimately needing to get service done or work done to it to repair that. This keeps it out of sight, out of mind, but more importantly, out of harm's way, which I think was a really solid move. Also, Lectric has always been famous for these quick release pedals. And I always liked their quick release pedals, but somehow they kind of improved on these. So we've got what looks like a better finish on the aluminum for one thing, but more importantly, the quick release mechanism, they changed something to it. So on the last versions, if you didn't get it put back just right, every now and then they would just pop off, like it wasn't quite seated right. And whatever that thing was, they have fixed it on this one. These attach and detach even easier, and I've not had one fall off ever, so I do like the new pedals on here. So some things that, and another thing on here, the upgraded components. So Shimano has, well, really all the group set makers out there have basically tiers to their group sets. And so everything from entry level at the bottom tier all the way up to what the pros are using within Shimano, within SRAM, within, whoever. And in this case, it previously used a Shimano tourney, which was a more entry level. They've stepped up one tier on Shimano's hierarchy to the Shimano Altus. This just makes serviceability, longevity a little bit better. All these parts, the Shimano Altus drivetrain, the Star Union brakes, which they collabed with Star Union on some really nice feeling brakes, and these perform really well. Plus they have thicker rotors. And these thicker rotors are just going to do a better job of cooling. They're going to last longer on your pads and ultimately just improve the braking of the bike. So you've got hydraulic disc brakes, Shimano Altus group set, and everything is easily serviceable and accessible, especially with those exposed wires on the bottom. Everything on this bike can be dealt with easier than a mechanic or yourself having to open it up, start pulling cables, or look for some proprietary part that's not really easy to find. Going with these name brand components and having these cables outside of the frame just makes servicing and maintenance much easier and cheaper if you pay for it. All right, so some things I would improve, just a couple, but I think they are important and worth noting. So first, right here, you can see on this chainstay, we already have a lot of grease and chain slap. Now, in the perfect world, you would have a clutch derailleur and there'd be very limited chain slap, but a clutch derailleur doesn't really make sense for a lifestyle bike like this that people use just to get around town. So you're just gonna have some natural flop of the chain, which is fine. It happens on all bikes, but with no protective film there, no big rubber stop, whatever you wanna call it, with no protective layer here, ultimately that chain slap over time is going to chip away the paint and then ultimately going to chip into the raw metal underneath, which you don't wanna do for the longevity of the bike. So I would say jump on Amazon, look for some frame protectant material. They sell it in bulk, they sell it in little pieces. It's very inexpensive and you can simply just apply a strip right here and that should take care of that down the road, which is just an easy, cheap way to take care of this on your own. And then one more thing, I'll put some footage up on the screen as I talk so it makes more sense, but when you fold this bike, all folding bikes fold into themselves, that's nothing new, but this one does have one contact point between the front fork bolt axle, front axle bolt, and the rear part of the frame. You can see here on the screen this damage. It's really from the way they line up when they close. There should have been some protective film either put on the fork or put on this frame. Either way, this contact point needs some sort of protection so you don't continue to damage this even further beyond what I've already done here. So another area just to pick up some either rubber protective film or some sort of product that will just gently soften those impacts and reduce the possibility of damaging your frame. One other thing to know about, it's not really a con, it's just something you should know about. So when I got this bike, I was really pleased to see the beefed up braking and the thicker rotors. That is a net good for everybody with a bike. The only small issue I ran into, and not really an issue, just one of those things you should know about, is because we only have a set amount of space between a brake caliper and the pads for the rotor to slide into, on a thinner rotor or a less expensive rotor, you have a thinner rotor taking up that same amount of space. So you have a little room on either side of the rotor so you never get any rub between the brake pads. But on a thicker one like this, when I first started riding this bike, I would notice a little bit of rotor rub and I would look to see if I could just square it up or maybe improve the centering of the rotor between the two pads. But because there's such a small amount of space to give you, it's very hard to get it right. And so don't be surprised if when you first start riding this bike, you can hear your rotors maybe rubbing a little bit against the pads. there's just very little room to kind of make those adjustments. But the good thing is within a few rides, within a few hard braking, you take the edge off the front edge of those brake pads and you start creating room every single day that you brake on this bike. Those pads get worn, little 1/1000ths of a, you know, they're just tiny little wear downs every day. And ultimately it creates more space in there for that rotor, and you'll never hear the rotor rubbing again. But just know in the beginning, I did have a little bit of that, and that was the reason. Not something that was a mechanical or a build error, more of just a room and space and fitment error. But at the end of the day, I'd rather have the net good of the better braking, and these Star Union brakes have really been fantastic, and they kind of punch above their weight class, to be honest. Aside from those few gripes, really, they did a really solid job on this bike, and it's kind of shocking that even in 2025, this is $999. So yeah, really solid job on this, and overall, very easy to maintain and work on. All right, guys, so there you have it, the all-new Lectric XP4. I know a lot of you guys were really interested in when this was coming out and getting all the details. Hopefully I've answered all your questions. Frankly, it's pretty well done. We got new upgrades front to back. We got a completely redesigned frame with better geo. We got some new colors. And frankly, it just feels like a whole new ride, but somehow kept that $999 price tag. I'm not gonna pretend to know how they do it. I'm just glad they do it, and hopefully you are too. Now, if I've missed anything about this bike you wanna know, drop me a question down below. I will reach out to the brand and communicate and try to figure out what I didn't cover and what you need to figure out, and I'll personally get back to you so you have that information. Now, if you haven't already done so, consider liking and subscribing, and check out our weekly news show, Between the Watts. It's a 1 hour or roughly 1 hour show, podcast show we do here on the channel to talk about all things e-bike related. And until the next review comes out, I'll see you guys out on the trail.